The day my mother told me I was no longer her daughter, she did it in front of 43 people. Family members, friends, neighbors, even a few co-workers who had known me since I was a teenager. And the worst part, nobody stood up for me. Not one person. I stood there in the middle of my grandmother's 75th birthday party feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. My mother looked me directly in the eyes and said the words I'll never forget. If you walk out that door, don't ever call yourself my daughter again. The room went silent. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died. Everyone stared. And I remember thinking the same thing over and over. How did we get here? Because despite what happened that day, I never hated my mother. I spent most of my life trying to earn her love. Trying to prove I was good enough. Trying to become the daughter she wanted. But no matter what I did, I always came second. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 38 years old. And for most of my life, my younger sister Melissa was the center of our family universe. Melissa could do no wrong. At least according to my mother. If Melissa forgot a birthday, she was busy. If I forgot one, I was selfish. If Melissa lost her job, the economy was to blame. If I struggled financially, it was because I wasn't trying hard enough. Those were the rules. Everyone knew them. Nobody talked about them. My father used to joke about it. Your mother has a favorite child. He would laugh when he said it. But I could always see the sadness behind his smile. Because he knew it was true. The favoritism became obvious when we were adults. Melissa received help with everything. Rent, car payments, credit card debt, even vacations. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs during my 20s just to stay afloat. When I bought my first house, I did it without a single dollar of family assistance. When Melissa bought hers, my parents covered the down payment. Mom called it helping family. Called it choosing favorites. Still I kept my mouth shut. For years. I got married, had a son, built a life, and tried to convince myself that family was worth preserving. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. The real trouble started after my father passed away. Dad had always been the balance in our family. The peacemaker. The person who quietly made sure everyone was treated fairly. Without him, everything changed. Mom became even more attached to Melissa. And Melissa took advantage of it. Within a year, Mom had practically moved into Melissa's life. She babysat her children every week. Paid bills when money got tight. Bought expensive gifts. Meanwhile, I was lucky if she answered my phone calls. The rejection hurt. But what happened next hurt even more. One afternoon I received a call from my mother's attorney. First I thought something terrible had happened. Instead I learned something shocking. My mother had transferred ownership of several family assets. Properties my father and grandfather had worked decades to acquire. And almost all of them were being placed into Melissa's name. I wasn't supposed to know. The attorney called by mistake. He thought I had already been informed. I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone after the call ended. Unable to breathe. Unable to think. I wasn't upset about money. I was upset about what it meant. Another reminder. Another message. Another confirmation that I mattered less. When I confronted Mom, she didn't even deny it. It's my decision. What about Dad's wishes? Your father trusted me. Would he have wanted everything to go to Melissa? Her expression hardened. Don't start this. I'm asking a question. You're jealous. The word hit me like a slap. Jealous. After everything I'd sacrificed. Everything I'd endured. That was what she thought of me. I left her house in tears. For weeks we barely spoke. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. Melissa enjoyed every second of it. She would smile politely while making little comments. Tiny insults disguised as jokes. You've always been sensitive, Lauren. You worry too much. Mom just feels closer to me. Every word felt intentional. Every smile felt calculated. Then came Grandma's birthday party. The event that changed everything. Nearly the entire family attended. Aunts, uncles, cousins, old friends, everyone. I almost didn't go. Something felt wrong. But Grandma begged me to come. So I did. First, things seemed normal. People laughed. Kids played. Food was served. Then Melissa made an announcement. She stood beside Mom and raised a champagne glass. "I have exciting news." Everyone looked over. Mom beamed with pride. Melissa smiled. "Mom has decided to transfer the lake house to me." The room erupted in applause. Felt sick. The lake house wasn't just property. It was family history. My grandfather built it. My father loved it. Every childhood memory lived there. And now it was hers. Just hers. Everyone congratulated her. Nobody questioned it. Nobody seemed surprised. Then my cousin asked the question that changed everything. "What does Lauren think?" Suddenly dozens of eyes turned toward me. Froze. Mom looked annoyed. Melissa looked amused. I tried to stay calm. "I think Dad would have wanted both daughters included." The silence was immediate. Melissa rolled her eyes. Mom's face darkened. And then she stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Your father trusted me to make decisions." "I know." "Then stop questioning me." "I'm not questioning you." "Yes, you are." The tension in the room became unbearable. People looked away. Nobody wanted involvement. But nobody stopped it either. Years of resentment finally surfaced. "I've spent my entire life watching you choose Melissa." Mom laughed bitterly. "Oh, please. No." My voice shook. "But it's true." Melissa crossed her arms. "Here we go." I ignored her. "You paid her debts." Silence. "You bought her house." More silence. "You gave her dad's properties." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then my mother said something that shattered whatever remained of our relationship. "If you're so unhappy, then leave." The room gasped. I stared at her. "Excuse me." "You heard me." My heart pounded. "Mom." "No." She pointed toward the door. "If all you want to do is attack this family, then leave." Tears filled my eyes. I looked around the room. At relatives, friends, people who had watched this happen for years. Nobody said a word. Not one. Then Mom delivered the final blow. "If you walk out that door, don't ever call yourself my daughter again." The words echoed through the room. Every face blurred. Every sound disappeared. For a second I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't believe my own mother had just disowned me in front of everyone. And the worst part. Melissa smiled. Small smile. But I saw it. She was happy. Happy that I was finally being pushed out. I looked at my grandmother. Tears streamed down her face. My aunt stared at the floor. Several cousins looked uncomfortable. Still nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. Nobody stopped her. So I picked up my purse and walked out. The entire room watched. My mother didn't call after me. She didn't apologize. She didn't stop me. She simply turned away. As if I no longer existed. I drove home crying so hard I nearly pulled over twice. By the time I reached my house, my phone had dozens of notifications. Messages, texts, missed calls. Most came from relatives. Not one contained an apology. Not one defended me. Most simply said the same thing. "You should make peace. You know how your mother is. Family is family." As if I was responsible. As if I had caused this. Then a final text arrived. The sender's name made my stomach drop. It was from my grandmother. The message contained only one sentence. "Lauren, there is something your father wanted you to know before he died. And your mother never wanted anyone to find out." I stared at the screen. reading the words again and again. Then my phone rang. It was Grandma. Her voice was shaking. "Come see me tomorrow." "Why?" A long silence followed. Then she whispered something that changed everything. "Because your mother has been lying to this family for over 20 years. And before I could ask another question, she hung up. I barely slept that night. My grandmother's words kept replaying in my head. Your mother has been lying to this family for over 20 years. What kind of lie could survive 20 years? And why would my father want me to know about it? By sunrise, my anxiety was unbearable. I drove to Grandma's house the moment she called. She opened the door before I even knocked. The sight of her shocked me. She looked exhausted, older than she had just 2 days earlier, as though carrying a burden she could no longer hide. The moment I stepped inside, she hugged me tightly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she pulled away. "I should have told you years ago." My stomach tightened. "Told me what?" Grandma glanced toward the dining room. A large brown folder sat on the table, the same type lawyers use for legal documents. My pulse quickened. "Lauren," she said quietly, "what happened at the party was wrong." Tears filled my eyes again. "I don't understand why she hates me." Grandma's expression broke. "Oh, sweetheart." She sat down heavily. Then she opened the folder. Inside were documents, old photographs, letters, bank records, and one envelope sealed with my father's handwriting. The sight of it instantly brought tears to my eyes. Dad had been gone for 3 years. Yet somehow seeing his handwriting made the loss feel fresh again. Grandma carefully picked up the envelope. "Your father left this with me before he died." I stared at it. "He did." She nodded. "He told me to give it to you if certain things happened." "What things?" Her eyes filled with sadness. "If your mother ever tried to cut you out of the family." My heart stopped. Dad knew. He actually knew this could happen. Grandma handed me the envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Short one. But every word changed me. "Lauren, if you're reading this, then I'm afraid my worst fears came true. Hope I'm wrong. I hope your mother chose differently. But if she didn't, I need you to know something important. You were never the problem. You never were. And there are truths about our family that your mother has spent years hiding. Trust Grandma. She knows everything. Love always." By the time I finished reading, I was crying. Grandma was crying too. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I looked up. "What truths?" She hesitated. For the first time, she seemed genuinely afraid. Then she shook her head. "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" "Because if I tell you now, you'll confront your mother." "Of course I will. And she'll destroy evidence." The words made me pause. Evidence? What kind of evidence? Suddenly this felt much bigger than family drama. Much bigger than favoritism. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Your father spent years trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Instead of answering, she handed me several papers. Bank statements, property records, trust documents. As I reviewed them, confusion turned into shock. Several assets originally intended to be divided equally between my sister and me had been altered. Legally altered. Somehow. Anyway, almost everything now favored Melissa. How is this possible? Grandma's face darkened. That's exactly the question your father started asking before he got sick. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying Mom changed things? I'm saying your father became suspicious. The room suddenly felt colder. He never told me. He wanted proof first. Proof. That word again. Proof of what? Before I could ask another question, my phone started ringing. Melissa. I declined the call. It rang again. And again. Then a text appeared. You owe him an apology. Another arrived seconds later. Everyone is talking about your behavior. Then another. You embarrassed her. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Embarrassed her. She publicly disowned me. Yet somehow I was the villain. Grandma noticed my expression. What is it? I handed her the phone. She read the messages, then slowly placed it down. I think it's time people started hearing the truth. Unfortunately, the rest of the family had different plans. Within days, I became the family scapegoat. Relatives stopped calling. Aunts ignored me. Cousins unfriended me on social media. Some people I had known my entire life suddenly treated me like a stranger. Melissa controlled the narrative. And Mom backed her completely. According to them, I was greedy, jealous, bitter, ungrateful. Every lie spread quickly. People believed it because it was easier than questioning my mother. Meanwhile, life became harder. My son Ethan noticed something was wrong. He was 14. Old enough to understand tension. Young enough to still be hurt by it. One evening he asked a question that shattered my heart. Grandma doesn't love us anymore. I nearly cried. Why would you ask that? Because she hasn't called. I looked away, unable to answer. Because the truth was complicated. The truth was ugly. The truth was that his grandmother had chosen sides. And it wasn't ours. Weeks passed. Then came another blow. One afternoon a certified letter arrived at my house. I opened it casually. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. It was legal notice regarding the lake house. The property had officially been transferred. Not just transferred. Sold. To an outside buyer. Melissa had sold it. Immediately. Without hesitation. Without consulting anyone. Without caring what it meant. Generations of family memories. Just like that. I drove to my mother's house. Furious. Heartbroken. Desperate for answers. When I arrived, Melissa's car was already there. Course it was. The golden child always arrived first. I walked inside without knocking. Mom looked startled. Melissa looked annoyed. What are you doing here? Melissa asked. I threw the legal notice onto the table. You sold the lake house. So, my voice cracked. Grandpa built that house. Mom folded her arms. It belonged to Melissa. No. I stared directly at her. It belonged to our family. Melissa rolled her eyes. It was my property. You got it 3 weeks ago. And I looked at Mom, waiting, hoping, praying she would finally understand. Instead, she defended Melissa. Again. She had every right. Something inside me broke. Not anger. Not sadness. Something deeper. Hope. The last bit of hope I had for our relationship. Because in that moment I realized my mother wasn't making mistakes. She was making choices. Conscious choices. Repeated choices. And every single one hurt me. I left without another word. 3 days later, the worst loss arrived. Grandma suffered a stroke. The call came just after midnight. I raced to the hospital. Terrified. Shaking. Praying. When I arrived, doctors were already working on her. Family members filled the waiting room. Including Mom. Including Melissa. The atmosphere was unbearable. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody acknowledged me. As though I wasn't family anymore. Exactly the way Mom wanted. Hours later, the doctor emerged. The news wasn't good. Grandma survived. But recovery would be difficult. Very difficult. As family members processed the information, I noticed something strange. Mom looked nervous. Not sad. Nervous. Melissa too. The two kept exchanging worried glances. Whispering. Watching each other. And suddenly I remembered Grandma's words. Your mother has been lying to this family for over 20 years. Terrible realization hit me. Grandma was the only person who knew everything. And if something happened to her, the truth could disappear forever. That night I sat beside her hospital bed, listening to machines beep, watching her sleep, wondering if I'd ever get answers. Then, just before dawn, Grandma opened her eyes. Weakly, slowly, painfully, she looked at me, reached for my hand, and whispered 5 words that changed everything. Check the safety deposit box. Before I could ask another question, nurses rushed into the room. And moments later, my mother appeared in the doorway, looking terrified, because somehow, she had heard exactly what Grandma said. I couldn't stop thinking about the look on my mother's face. The moment Grandma whispered those words, "Check the safety deposit box," Mom had gone pale, not surprised, not confused, terrified. And that terrified me, because people don't react like that unless they already know what's hidden. The next morning, I barely waited for the sun to rise. I drove straight home, found the spare key Grandma had once given me for emergencies, and searched through the small wooden jewelry box she kept in her bedroom. Took less than 10 minutes. There it was. A tiny brass key attached to a faded tag. My heart pounded. I immediately called the bank listed on one of Grandma's old documents. The safety deposit box still existed. And according to their records, my name had recently been added as an authorized user. Grandma had prepared for this. She knew. She had known for a long time. 2 hours later, I sat in a small private room at the bank. A manager placed a metal box in front of me. Then he left. The moment the door closed, I inserted the key. My hands trembled. For a second I considered walking away. Whatever was inside had already caused years of pain. Maybe ignorance was safer. Maybe some secret should stay buried. But then I remembered my father's letter. "You were never the problem." Opened the box, and my entire world changed. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, letters, financial records, legal paperwork, and one sealed envelope labeled, "For Lauren." Opened it first. Inside was a handwritten letter from Grandma. The date at the top showed it had been written almost 2 years earlier. My eyes moved across the page. And with every sentence my shock grew. By the time I reached the end I was crying. Not because I was sad. 'Cause I finally understood. For 38 years I had blamed myself. I thought I wasn't lovable enough, smart enough, successful enough, important enough. But none of that had ever been true. The problem was never me. The problem was my mother. And the secret she had spent decades hiding. According to Grandma's letter, shortly after my father died, he discovered evidence that large amounts of family money had disappeared over the years. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands. Money that should have remained in family trusts. Money intended for both daughters. Money my grandfather believed was protected. Instead, it had quietly been redirected. Over and over again. The records showed exactly where it went. Melissa. Cars. Credit cards. Business failures. Luxury vacations. Private school tuition. Failed investments. My mother had spent nearly 20 years funneling family resources toward Melissa while hiding it from everyone else. Including my father. Including my grandparents. Including me. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. Then I found something even worse. A notarized statement. Signed by my father. The date was only 6 months before he died. In it, he described concerns about altered documents, property transfers, missing funds, and suspicious legal changes. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "If anything happens to me before I finish investigating, Lauren deserves the truth." I couldn't breathe. My father knew. He really knew. And he had tried to protect me. Tears blurred my vision. For several minutes I simply sat there. Then I discovered the document that explained everything. One piece of paper. One signature. One lie. Nearly 15 years earlier, my mother had altered instructions connected to a family trust. Not illegally at first, but deceptively. She used authority she possessed to gradually redirect benefits toward Melissa. Small changes, careful changes, changes most people would never notice. Over time those changes became enormous, life-changing, and nobody questioned them because they trusted her. The betrayal was staggering, but what hurt most wasn't the money. It was understanding why my life had always felt different, why opportunities seemed uneven, why support only flowed one direction. Because behind the scenes, my mother had been building Melissa's future while quietly limiting mine. The realization made me sick. When I finally left the bank, I felt numb. I drove home in silence, trying to process everything, trying to understand what came next. Then my phone rang. The caller surprised me. It was Uncle Robert, my father's older brother. For years he had avoided family conflict, stayed neutral, kept his distance. I almost ignored the call. Thankfully I didn't. "Lauren." "Hi." His voice sounded hesitant. "I need to talk to you." Something about his tone immediately caught my attention. "What happened?" A long pause followed. Then he said something unexpected. "I think your father tried to tell me." My heart skipped. "What?" "Years ago." I gripped the phone tighter. "He told me he was worried about financial records." The world seemed to stop. "You never told anyone." "He asked me not to." Closed my eyes. Dad really had been investigating. This wasn't suspicion. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. Uncle Robert sighed heavily. "I thought he was mistaken." "Why?" "Because nobody wanted to believe your mother could do something like that." The word stung. Because they were true. People often ignore warning signs when the truth is uncomfortable, especially inside families. That evening, Uncle Robert came to my house. For the first time in years, someone from my father's side of the family sat at my kitchen table. Listened, asked questions, reviewed evidence, and believed me. The feeling was overwhelming. After weeks of isolation, I finally had an ally. An unexpected ally. Together we spent hours organizing documents, building timelines, matching records. And with every discovery, the pattern became clearer. My mother hadn't simply favored Melissa. She had systematically protected her. Financially, emotionally, legally, at everyone else's expense. Including mine. Including my father's. Including my grandparents. Then Uncle Robert found something neither of us expected. A document hidden between old property records. The moment he handed it to me, I froze. Because the name on the page wasn't Melissa's. It wasn't Mom's either. It belonged to someone I had never heard of. A woman named Angela Brooks. The document showed repeated payments spanning almost 20 years. Thousands of dollars. Every year. Without explanation. Without documentation. Without reason. I looked at Uncle Robert. "Who is Angela Brooks?" He looked just as confused. "I have no idea." The mystery deepened. And somehow it felt important. Very important. That night I searched online. First I found nothing. Then around midnight a result appeared. Public record. A marriage record. My stomach dropped. Because the name attached to Angela Brooks wasn't my mother's. It was my father's. I stared at the screen, reading it again and again, unable to believe what I was seeing. My father. Married. To another woman. The date made no sense. The timeline made no sense. Nothing made sense. Immediately I called Uncle Robert. He answered on the second ring. "What happened?" Told him. Silence filled the line. Then he whispered, "Oh my God." My pulse raced. What does it mean? Another long silence. Then he said the words that changed the entire investigation. Lauren. His voice trembled. I think we've been looking at the wrong secret. He sat upright. What? I don't think the money is the biggest lie. Fear crawled through my chest. What are you saying? His answer came slowly, carefully, as though even he struggled to believe it. I think your mother has been hiding something far bigger than stolen money. The room suddenly felt cold, dangerously cold, because deep down I knew he was right. And if he was right, then everything I believed about my family was about to change. The next morning, a private investigator returned my call. He had found information about Angela Brooks. Information connected directly to my mother, directly to my father, and directly to a secret that had remained hidden for almost 4 decades. As I listened, the blood drained from my face. Because the investigator's first sentence was something I never expected to hear. Mrs. Mitchell, are you aware that your birth certificate may not be accurate? And in that moment, I realized my entire life might have been built on a lie. I didn't sleep at all that night. The investigator's words echoed through my mind over and over again. Your birth certificate may not be accurate. Every memory, every family photo, every holiday, every childhood moment, suddenly felt uncertain. I spent my entire life believing I knew who I was. Now I wasn't sure of anything. At exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, I met the investigator at his office. His name was David Reynolds, a former police detective. Professional. The kind of man who didn't make dramatic claims without evidence. Which terrified me even more. Because if he was saying something was wrong, then something was wrong. The moment I sat down, he slid a folder across the desk. I need you to understand something. I stared at him. What? This information isn't absolute proof. My chest tightened. But it's enough to raise serious questions. Slowly he opened the file. Inside were public records, marriage certificates, hospital records, old newspaper clippings, and photographs, lots of photographs. The first picture made my stomach drop. A young woman stood beside my father. They looked happy, comfortable, close, far too close. The date on the photograph was shocking. It had been taken nearly 2 years before my parents married. Who is she? David pointed to the name beneath the image. Angela Brooks. The same woman from the financial records. The same woman connected to those mysterious payments. My pulse accelerated. What does she have to do with me? David exhaled slowly. Then he delivered another bombshell. Angela Brooks gave birth to a baby girl 38 years ago. The room went silent. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Baby girl. 38 years ago. The exact year I was born. No. The word escaped automatically. No. David nodded sympathetically. I know this is difficult. I stared at the documents, refusing to accept what my mind already suspected. What are you saying? His voice softened. We believe Angela Brooks may be your biological mother. My world shattered. Everything disappeared. A room, desk, the walls, sounds. All of it vanished. Only one thought remained. My mother. The woman who raised me. The woman who spent my entire life treating me differently. The woman who had publicly disowned me. She might not actually be my biological mother. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Felt sick. Physically sick. David handed me a tissue. Then another document. Hospital records. Old legal paperwork. Evidence showing Angela disappeared from public records shortly after my birth. Completely disappeared. No death certificate. No relocation records. Nothing. As though she had simply vanished. What happened to her? David shook his head. We don't know yet. The uncertainty terrified me. Because if Angela really was my biological mother, then where had she gone? And why had nobody ever told me? Most importantly, did my father know? The answer came later that afternoon. Uncle Robert arrived carrying several boxes from my father's storage unit. Boxes nobody had opened since his death. For years they'd sat untouched, ignored, forgotten. Now they felt important, critically important. Together we spent hours sorting through them. Old tax returns, business records, family photographs. Then we found a journal. Dad's journal. The moment I opened it, I recognized his handwriting. My heart broke. Felt like hearing his voice again. Most entries were ordinary. Work, family, daily life. Then everything changed. 3 years before his death, the journal entries became different. More anxious, more focused, more suspicious. Dad had started investigating. Not just missing money. Missing truth. One entry made me freeze. I should have told Lauren years ago. My hands trembled. Kept reading. Susan refuses to discuss Angela. Every conversation becomes an argument. Susan. My mother. Or the woman I thought was my mother. Another entry. The lies have gone on too long. Another. Lauren deserves the truth. Tears streamed down my face. He knew. He knew everything. Or at least most of it. Then I reached the final relevant entry. The last one before his illness worsened. The words nearly stopped my heart. If anything happens to me, Robert must help Lauren find Angela. I looked up at Uncle Robert. He looked equally stunned. Why didn't he tell me? Robert's eyes filled with guilt. Because I never saw that entry. The room fell silent. Then a terrifying realization hit me. If Dad wanted me to find Angela, then Angela was probably alive. Somewhere. After nearly 4 decades. Alive. The possibility felt overwhelming. But before we could investigate further, something unexpected happened. The family started getting nervous. Very nervous. Apparently word had spread. Relatives learned I was reviewing records, hiring investigators, asking questions. Suddenly people who had ignored me for weeks began calling, texting, reaching out, trying to make peace. The timing was suspicious, especially my mother. For nearly a month she had treated me like I didn't exist. Then suddenly she wanted to talk. She called repeatedly. I ignored every attempt, until one evening she showed up at my house. Unannounced, standing on my front porch. For a moment I considered refusing to answer. But I needed to see her. Needed to understand. The moment I opened the door, I noticed something strange. She looked frightened. Not angry. Not arrogant. Frightened. For the first time in my life, my mother looked vulnerable. Lauren. I said nothing. She glanced around nervously. We need to talk. I crossed my arms. About what? A long silence followed. Then she asked a question that shocked me. Have you been speaking to investigators? My heart pounded. There it was. Confirmation. She knew. Or at least suspected. I stared directly into her eyes. Why does that matter? She swallowed. Because she couldn't answer honestly. Not without exposing herself. People are talking. People weren't talking when you disowned me. Her face flinched. For a second I thought she might apologize. Instead she changed the subject. Classic mom. Always avoiding responsibility. Always controlling the conversation. Your grandmother isn't well. I laughed bitterly. You suddenly care about grandma? Her expression darkened. I'm serious. So am I. The tension became unbearable. Finally she stepped closer and whispered something that chilled me. You need to stop digging. Every alarm bell in my head exploded. I stared at her. What? Leave the past alone. My voice became cold. No. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of her. Not even a little. And she knew it. The realization scared her. Could see it. Then she made a mistake. Huge mistake. One that would ultimately destroy everything she'd spent decades protecting. Because before leaving, she said 5 words she never should have said. 5 words that confirmed more than she realized. She looked directly at me and whispered, "Some truths only hurt people." Then she walked away. The moment she disappeared, I called David. The investigator listened carefully. Then he asked one question. Did she deny Angela? Froze. No. She hadn't. Not once. She never asked who Angela was. Never questioned the investigation. Never acted confused. Because she already knew exactly who Angela Brooks was. And that meant one thing. The secret was real. Very real. 3 days later, David called with another breakthrough. His voice sounded different. Excited. Urgent. "Lauren, I found her." The room spun. My knees nearly gave out. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Finally I managed one question. "Who?" David answered immediately. "Angela Brooks." I grabbed the edge of the table, barely able to breathe. After nearly 40 years. After decades of lies. After a lifetime of questions. We had finally found the woman who might be my biological mother. But before I could process the news, David added one final sentence. A sentence that changed everything. "And she says she's been waiting 38 years to tell you what your mother did." The confrontation was no longer coming. It had begun. For 38 years I thought I knew my story. I thought I understood my family. I thought I understood why my mother treated me differently. I thought maybe I simply wasn't enough. Not lovable enough. Not successful enough. Not important enough. But as I sat across from Angela Brooks for the first time, every lie I had ever believed began to collapse. She looked nervous. Terrified, actually. The same way I felt. Her hands trembled as she held a cup of coffee. Several times she opened her mouth to speak. Several times she stopped herself. Neither of us knew how to begin. Because how do you introduce yourself to a woman who might be your biological mother? How do you make up for 38 lost years? Finally, Angela broke the silence. "You have your father's eyes." The words hit me harder than I expected. Instantly, tears filled my eyes. Angela's eyes filled too. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her purse and removed a photograph. It was old, worn, faded around the edges. She slid it across the table. My breath caught. The picture showed a young woman holding a newborn baby. Me. There was no doubt. I recognized the blanket from old family photos. Recognized the tiny birthmark on my shoulder. My hands began shaking. "Where did you get this?" Angela's voice cracked. "Because I took it." The room seemed to spin. I stared at the photograph, then at her, then back at the photograph. My entire body felt numb. Tears streamed down Angela's face. "I never stopped looking for you." I couldn't speak, couldn't think. The pain in her voice felt real. Too real to fake. Finally, I managed one question. What happened? Angela closed her eyes and told me the story that changed everything. 39 years earlier, Angela and my father had been engaged, young, in love, planning a future together. Then everything fell apart. A terrible misunderstanding, manipulation, and one woman determined to get what she wanted. Susan, my mother, or rather the woman who raised me. According to Angela, Susan had been obsessed with my father for years. When Angela became pregnant, Susan inserted herself into their lives. First as a friend, then something else, something darker. By the time I was born, Angela's relationship with my father had become strained. Arguments increased, trust disappeared, and Susan was always there, always influencing, always whispering, always creating division. Then came the moment that destroyed everything. Angela suffered severe complications shortly after my birth. She spent weeks recovering. During that time, Susan told lies. Massive lies. She convinced people Angela intended to abandon her child. Convinced others Angela was unstable. Convinced my father that Angela had left voluntarily. The manipulation was devastating. And before Angela could recover and fight back, Susan had already taken control of the situation. By the time Angela returned, I was gone. So was my father. For years she tried finding us. For years she failed. Then eventually she disappeared from everyone's radar. Not because she stopped caring. 'Cause she ran out of money. Ran out of resources. Ran out of hope. By the end of her story, both of us were crying. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Yet every piece fit. Every unexplained detail. Every strange behavior. Every secret. It all made sense. Then Angela handed me one final document. The document that would destroy my mother's entire world. A notarized affidavit. Signed decades ago. It described exactly what Susan had done. Exactly how she manipulated events. Exactly how she separated a mother from her child. And it wasn't alone. There were witnesses. Supporting statements. Evidence. Real evidence. Not rumors. Not stories. Proof. For a long moment, I stared at the document. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Why didn't you expose her? Angela looked down. And her answer broke my heart. Because nobody believed me. The room fell silent. I understood that feeling. Better than anyone. Nobody believed me either. Till now. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, the truth finally had a chance. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Because Grandma's condition had improved enough for her to return home. And she had one request. Family gathering. Everyone present. Every relative. Every cousin. Every aunt. Every uncle. Everyone. The exact same people who watched my mother disown me. The exact same people who stayed silent. The exact same people who believed her lies. This time would be different. Very different. The gathering took place 1 week later. Nearly 50 people attended. The atmosphere felt strange. Uneasy. Word had spread that something important was happening. Nobody knew exactly what. But everyone sensed it. Mom arrived with Melissa. Both looked confident. Certain. They still believed they controlled the narrative. They still believed they controlled the family. They had no idea what was coming. I arrived with Uncle Robert. A few minutes later, Angela arrived. The moment Mom saw her, the color drained from her face. Completely. For several seconds she looked unable to breathe. Melissa looked confused. But Mom knew. She knew instantly. And for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear. Grandma noticed too. From her chair she quietly said, It's time. The room fell silent. Everyone turned. Nobody understood what was happening. Then Angela stepped forward. And my mother's entire body stiffened. No. The word escaped before she could stop it. The room froze. Dozens of confused faces turned toward her. Angela looked directly at Susan. 38 years of pain filled her eyes. 38 years of loss. 38 years of stolen time. Then she spoke. "Hello, Susan." The silence became suffocating. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Uncle Robert began distributing copies of documents, affidavits, records, evidence, one by one, across the room. Confused expressions quickly turned into shock, then disbelief, then horror. Questions exploded everywhere. What is this? Is this real? Oh my God! No way! My mother's hands began shaking. Melissa looked completely lost. Grandma slowly stood. Despite her weakness, despite her age, despite everything, she stood and addressed the family. For the first time, publicly, she told them everything. The favoritism, the hidden transfers, the manipulated trusts, the missing money, the deception, and finally, Angela, the biggest secret of all. The room erupted. People shouted. People cried. People demanded answers. Several relatives looked physically ill. One cousin stormed out. An aunt burst into tears. Then came the final blow. The DNA test. Because 2 days earlier Angela and I had submitted samples. Fast track. Verified. Legally documented. The results had arrived that morning. Grandma handed the envelope to me. The entire room watched. My hands trembled. Opened it. Read the first page. Then the second. And finally the conclusion. I looked up. Tears filling my eyes. Angela was crying too. Because the result confirmed what we already suspected. There was a 99.99% probability that Angela Brooks was my biological mother. The room exploded. People gasped. Others cried. Some stared at Susan in disbelief. My mother, or the woman who raised me, looked trapped, cornered, finished. Then someone asked the question everyone was thinking. Is it true? Silence. Susan looked around the room, searching for an escape, searching for support. There was none. Not anymore. The lies had finally run out. And for the first time in nearly 40 years, the truth stood in front of everyone. Susan's voice barely emerged. Yes. The room collectively gasped. Then she lowered her head and confessed everything. The manipulation, the lies, the deception, the favoritism, the money, the secrets, all of it. One confession after another. Until there was nothing left to hide. By the time she finished, many relatives were crying. Others looked furious. Some refused to even look at her. Melissa sat frozen, unable to process what she'd heard. Because her entire life had been built on advantages created by deception. And now everyone knew. Every single person. The woman who publicly disowned me. The woman who spent decades making me feel unwanted. The woman who told me I was no longer her daughter. Had finally lost control. And lost the family she worked so hard to control. But the most surprising moment came next. Because despite everything, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel satisfied. Felt free. For the first time in my life. I knew the truth. And nobody could take it away. As the family struggled to process what had happened, my mother looked directly at me. Tears streamed down her face. And for the first time ever, she whispered 2 words I had waited my entire life to hear. I'm sorry. But by then, the damage was already done. And some apologies arrived decades too late. After my mother's confession, nobody knew what to say. The room that had once been filled with laughter and conversation felt frozen in time. Some relatives sat silently staring at the floor. Others cried openly. A few simply left. The truth had shattered the image of our family. Not because families are perfect, but because the lies had lasted so long. Nearly 4 decades. 40 years of manipulation. 40 years of secrets. 40 years of stolen relationships. And now everyone was trying to understand how it had happened. I looked around the room. My cousins, my aunts, my uncles, people who had watched me grow up. People who had witnessed my mother's favoritism for years. Many couldn't even meet my eyes. Because deep down they knew something else had been exposed that day. Not just my mother's lies. Their silence. The silence that allowed those lies to survive. Grandma sat quietly in her chair. Exhausted, but peaceful. For the first time in years she looked relieved. The burden she carried was finally gone. The secret was no longer hers to protect. And neither was I. Across the room, Melissa sat completely still. She looked lost, broken, confused. The confident woman who always stood beside Mom was gone. In her place sat someone who had just learned that much of her life had been built on deception. For several minutes she stared at the documents in front of her. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in our lives. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't know. The room fell silent again. Nobody interrupted. Nobody spoke. Melissa slowly shook her head. I swear I didn't know. I believed her. That surprised me. After everything we'd been through, I expected anger, resentment, bitterness. But when I looked at her, I saw another victim. Not innocent. She had benefited from the favoritism. She had enjoyed the advantages. She had participated in some of the cruelty. But she hadn't created the lie. Our mother had. And in many ways, Melissa had spent her entire life being manipulated too. She started crying. Hard. The kind of crying that comes from realizing everything you believed was wrong. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. So sorry. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wasn't ready. Because forgiveness isn't something that appears instantly. Not after decades. Not after a lifetime. Still I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. A few minutes later, the gathering ended. People left quietly. Nobody argued. Nobody celebrated. There were no winners. Only truth. And sometimes truth hurts everyone involved. That night I sat alone on my back porch, watching the sunset, thinking about everything that had happened. The phone in my hand felt heavier than usual, because I knew one call remained. One conversation I had avoided my entire life. My mother. Or rather, Susan. For 38 years I called her Mom. Now I didn't know what to call her. Part of me wanted to ignore her forever. Part of me wanted answers. Eventually the phone rang. And I answered. Neither of us spoke at first. Then she whispered. I don't deserve this call. I looked toward the horizon. No. You don't. Silence. Painful silence. Then she started crying. Not dramatic crying. Not manipulative crying. Real crying. The kind that comes when someone finally sees the damage they've caused. I ruined everything. Closed my eyes. Because for once she wasn't wrong. She had. Not intentionally at first, perhaps. But over time. One lie became another. One selfish decision became 10. Then 100. Until eventually she couldn't escape her own deception. I loved you. The words surprised me. For years I wanted to hear them. Now they felt complicated. I believe you. Her crying intensified. But you loved control more. The silence that followed told me everything. Because she knew it was true. People often think destruction comes from hatred. Sometimes it comes from fear. Fear of losing something. Fear of being exposed. fear of telling the truth. And fear had controlled Susan for decades. Eventually she whispered, "I wish I could change it." I looked at the darkening sky. "So do I." Then I ended the call. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing else to say. The next few months brought enormous changes. The legal investigations continued. The financial records were reviewed. Property transfers were challenged. Several assets were restored to their original arrangements. Not all of them. Some damage couldn't be undone. The lake house was gone forever. Some money was unrecoverable. Some opportunities had vanished decades earlier. But enough truth remained to correct part of the injustice. And that mattered. More importantly, the family changed. For years people had followed my mother's version of reality. Now they started forming their own opinions. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in months reached out. Some apologized. Some admitted they should have questioned things sooner. Some simply wanted another chance. Not everyone earned one, but many did. Because healing requires honesty. And many of them were finally honest. The biggest surprise came from Grandma. 3 months after the confrontation, she invited everyone to her house, including Angela, the woman I was still getting to know. The woman who had missed 38 years of birthdays, 38 years of Christmas mornings, 38 years of ordinary moments. No amount of truth could return that time. But we could still build something new. When Angela arrived, Grandma hugged her. Then something remarkable happened. The family welcomed her. Not instantly, not perfectly, but sincerely. For the first time, Angela wasn't treated like a ghost. She was treated like family. 'Cause she was. The relationship between us grew slowly. Some days felt natural. Others felt awkward. Neither of us knew exactly how to make up for decades apart. But we tried. And that effort mattered. One afternoon, months later, we sat together looking through old photographs. Pictures of me as a child. Pictures she had never seen. Pictures she should have been part of. Tears filled her eyes repeatedly. Finally she smiled. "You were beautiful." I laughed. "I was a weird kid." She laughed too. And for a moment the years disappeared. Not completely, but enough. Enough to create hope. Enough to create healing. Enough to create a future. Meanwhile, Susan became increasingly isolated. Not because anyone punished her. Because trust had disappeared. And trust is difficult to rebuild. Especially when betrayal lasts decades. To her credit, she didn't run. She didn't deny what happened. She accepted responsibility. Attended counseling. Made amends where she could. Sometimes people asked whether I forgave her. The answer was complicated. Forgiveness isn't approval. Forgiveness isn't pretending something never happened. Forgiveness is refusing to carry the poison forever. Eventually I forgave her. Not because she deserved it. 'Cause I deserved peace. And carrying anger for the rest of my life would only create another prison. The greatest moment came almost a year later. Grandma celebrated her 76th birthday. The entire family gathered again. The same family that witnessed my humiliation. The same family that watched my mother disown me. But this time was different. Very different. As everyone shared stories and memories, Grandma stood and raised her glass. The room grew quiet. She smiled at me. Then she said something I'll never forget. For years, this family believed the strongest person was the loudest. I paused. But I was wrong. Everyone listened. The strongest person in this family is Lauren. My eyes filled with tears. Grandma continued. Because when she was rejected, she didn't become cruel. More tears. When she was lied to, she didn't lie back. The room remained silent. When she was hurt, she searched for truth instead of revenge. By then I was openly crying. So were several others. Then Grandma delivered her final words. The truth eventually wins, not because it is powerful, but because lies are too heavy to carry forever. The room erupted in applause. Not for me. For the truth. For healing. For freedom. For finally breaking a cycle that should have ended decades earlier. Today, when people ask me what I learned from everything that happened, my answer is simple. Never measure your worth by the way someone else treats you. Sometimes people reject you because of their own wounds, their own fears, their own failures, not because you deserve it. For most of my life, I believed I wasn't enough. The truth was much simpler. I was never the problem. And neither are you when someone else's inability to love honestly becomes your burden to carry. Because the people who underestimate your value often reveal more about themselves than they ever reveal about you. And eventually, the truth has a way of finding the light. No matter how long it stays hidden.